Welcome back, everybody, to the podcast HRevolution. We're discussing today the revolution of HR for the evolution of business, and we do that through conversations with industry experts like Caroline today, discussing how HR can become a better business partner within their organization today to really continue or propel HR forward. As well as business today, we know there's new challenges that require the feelers to really get more involved in the day-to-day operations, as well as the well-being of our employees to strengthen that employee value proposition. So we do that through conversations. This is a passion project of mine and my co-host, Chris Derone.
Excellent. Thanks, Kevin. And again, once again, we are here to bring the information out to all of you in our audience who's watching this podcast, really want to know what's going on today in the state of HR, and then really where do we need to set ourselves up for that future of HR, and more importantly, the future of work. So with us today is Caroline Schein. She is the Vice President of People and Culture at Article, which was just named one of Canada's top growing companies for the third straight year in a row. So that's fantastic. Caroline also has HR leadership experience in the financial, retail, and hospitality industries. Caroline, it is our pleasure to have you with us today. Welcome to HRevolution.
Thank you very much. And I'm happy to be here and happy to be part of the conversation.
Awesome. Well, I'll get started, Caroline. Since you are across the border, our neighbor to the north, I have to ask, what do you have for breakfast in the morning? Is it Canadian bacon or?
No, this is embarrassing. Red Bull.
Red Bull. That's how the real winners in HR get their morning started.
Yeah, you gotta get going quickly.
Well, you are out on the West Coast, so it's a 3-hour time difference for us here. So
yeah.
Excellent.
So a lot of people in HR, or a lot of people that think they know HR, do not believe that HR have lives outside of work. Some might believe that, Caroline, you might have a cot in your office and you never leave. What do you do for fun?
Wow, what do I do for fun? Well, I live in North Vancouver, which right by the mountains. So for fun, I love to get out and hike, which I try to do several times a week, or bike, just walking around, getting outside. And we live in the Pacific Northwest, which is a rainforest, which means it rains a lot. So you just got to get used to walking in the rain or hiking.
Excellent. I'm going to dive right into it if you don't mind, Caroline. And one of the things that we're seeing and we're witnessing and experiencing here in the States is, kind of that return to the office, right? So we went about 18 months where, everybody was fully remote. Now we're starting to bring our workers back in the office. And what we're seeing is there's a hybrid environment of sorts. We have some people who are still fully remote, because that's what we want to do. We want to make sure we're accommodating some people who are full-time in the office because, quite frankly, they couldn't wait to get back into the office. And then we have some people doing a mixture of the two. Where are you, just so that our listeners know, we can kind of compare those two. Where exactly is British Columbia at this point in time from a work environment standpoint?
For BC, I mean, where we're living and working, many people are kind of in this in-between state, still trying to figure out what to do. Rules are lightened up so people can come into the office. I'll speak on behalf of what we're doing here at Article. We made a decision back in the summertime to kind of get ahead of it and really kind of describe what is the future of work? What does it look like for Article? And kind of what are the conditions in which we want to, operate, recognizing that we knew where we were in the past, which is surprising for a tech company that we actually didn't have a remote work policy. It was kind of this assumption that, it was assumed that we didn't have one, therefore we didn't do it. And maybe the founders didn't agree with it. So therefore everyone just came to the office. Yeah. And it was kind of a hush hush if someone worked from home, which is kind of funny now in reflection. Now it is fully up to individuals and teams. So we put the conditions in. Look, I'm not going to mandate how you or your team should be working, best. Yeah. So, as long as the work's getting done and, people are, have all the tools and resources they need to be successful at it, why not allow them to continue to do what they've been doing, to your point, the last 18 months, right? So we are getting ready to open our office though. So we took upon ourselves to take a look at our design, and knowing that through a number of surveys, why people want to come back to work is to socialize, to connect, to get out of their home or their working space at home and getting that opportunity. So we figured, well, we should add more meeting rooms, because that seemed like a given, more collaborative spaces, and also a great opportunity to improve the technology. Because when you think about it, in the past, pre-COVID, you have, the odd time you have someone, on a video call, but they were often ignored. Everyone's talking in the room, and whoever's on the screen just kind of, catch up. Hopefully you can follow along what's going on, but no one's really including them. This is just a really great opportunity for us to think about now in this new hybrid world. What do we need to do from a technology perspective? What do we need to do to ensure that the people on the screen are feeling part of the conversation in the room? So we're actually going through and changing out all our technology now so that everyone has a box, they feel included. And we're actually changing our desk space too, so that you can see people around the room. And so giving consideration to that, I think, is really, really important. Plus, even teaching managers how to lead in a hybrid world, right? So you can't ignore the person behind you on the screen. On the spirit of being inclusive, how do you lead in a way where you have, now we have, some of our leaders have people all over the world, because it also, the cool part is it opened up the job market too. Right? So remote is here to stay for sure.
I'm glad you talked about the job market opening up, because I think it's forcing employers to really look inward to change some of the things that they've been doing for years. And I saw that some businesses started to try to put the cart before the horse. And I say that is that they tried to talk about being a diverse, equitable, and inclusive culture on the exterior of the business. And then when people bought that and came interior to the business, they realized that that couldn't be further from the truth. You being in British Columbia and having offices and probably employees here in the United States, we talk about almost the personality difference between the cultures between the United States and Canada. How do you properly, I guess, handle those types of challenges where you are dealing with two totally different demographics and trying to formulate your policies and procedures that are more enabling, I guess, both cross-border?
And I would extend that too, Kevin. It's not just Canada, US, but we have Mexico, we have Asia, we have Europe. So the consideration is far greater than that. I would say one thing that unifies us, and I'm going to speak a little bit about our culture. We have in January 2020, so just before COVID hit, we launched, we introduced something called the Article Way. And the Article Way is our guiding principles and essentially our values and kind of who we are and who we're not. And it really articulates well, defines our culture. And it's not, I love the work that we did here, because when we released it, it wasn't like, what is this? That's not us. Like, there's no disconnect. It was completely easily adopted. We did a lot of work to, onboard people to understand it. Everywhere from, road shows to, doing surveys against it. But as you read it, is this making sense? Where are the gaps? A lot of intentional work here. And I think that piece alone is the thread that weaves us and unites us as a company, as particles. And we call our people at Article particles. So it regardless of the country you're in, regardless of the area of business you're in, but it really is an important thread that ties us all together.
And it sounds like you are in tune with what your people want and almost flexible, where you can adjust and get change to accommodate those wants or desires of the employee population based off of your flexible work schedule that you had mentioned. When you're doing surveys today, what types of questions are you asking to, I guess, get a temperature check or to ensure that why are our people staying or choosing to work for our organization instead of anyone else?
So we have 3 surveys we run, 3 main ones. So 2 of them are our engagement survey. And so that's our big one we do in January, and we do it again in July. And we ask questions around, fit, belonging, the ability to learn and grow and to make a difference. So the questions are around, are they aligned to our values? So that's another thing I think is really important. There's a lot of questions around their connection to our guiding principles and to the degree that they feel a connection to it, but also hard questions around, are we living it?
Mhm.
is, are we living it outside of just themselves too? So we want to get a sense of not just that their personal alignment to it, but how are they seeing the organization? And then questions around psychological safety and questions along belonging and questions around, point blank, would they recommend, a simple question, the promoter score, but we call it the particle net promoter score. And that's something that we ask several times a year just to get a gauge. And fortunately, it's very high, which is fantastic. But I think those are really important questions. And then the inclusion and diversity survey also comes out once a year. And that digs in a little bit deeper. And we start to get more granular because the top line can look really positive. So you can have a really positive promoter score. And, ours is quite high. And so when we look at it from that lens, but what's below that? So is it really telling the whole story? And so this is where you get into that question, Kevin, around US, Canada, get into Asia, get into our particles around the world. Are they seeing it the same? What's their sentiment? So you need to go a little bit deeper, and also looking at it by gender, by people of color, by the LGBTQ plus community. There's so much opportunity to just cut and slice the data. So I guess the risk is don't look at the high, because you can high five and give yourself a lot of praise about that. But when you go deeper, there's always opportunities.
Yeah, and I think that really shows through when you start looking at retention. And here in the States, we've been talking about the Great Resignation for a while now, and people are jumping ship and moving on just because, quite frankly, the employees have redefined what that work experience is, because they've been given the opportunity to, as you said, more remote opportunities opens up the candidate pool, and now you're dealing with a wider spread. So you've given us a lot to unpack, Caroline, so far. I'm going to actually go back and forth a couple of times, but one of the things that I'm really interested in is leadership, and leadership development, and how do we look at developing, the next generation of leaders. And you kind of talked a little bit about it. We're in this new hybrid environment, and that really calls upon leaders to demonstrate very different characteristics. They're very different traits, skill sets. What would you say is the most important characteristic or skill set for leaders to now demonstrate, given that we've got this, hybrid environment?
I would say, and it's interesting because we don't have a fully developed leadership development program, so I want a full disclosure on that. But we're doing the big foundational work around looking at leadership capabilities from the article way perspective. So, and also what does it look like to be a leader at article, and then the role itself. But I'd say one of the most important right now is empathy, and really taking the time to understand employees and where they're at and what they're going through. And, it's interesting because I think, as much as I like to think I'm a caring individual, pre-COVID, you kind of still had those hard lines, like this is work and this is home, and you don't kind of blur the lines. And I've loved the fact that, we're seeing, like, this is my home office. I got pictures behind me. I got my Peloton. I mean, sometimes my kid walks in for money while I'm on a call. I've actually was in a presentation, my kid's asking me for money, and I'm like, right. And you get to see, like, our founder and CEO, like, there's many times his kids crawling on him. It humanizes us, right? And it's just been such a wonderful gift. Right. So I think there's just huge opportunity there, but empathy and understanding, and really taking the time to get to know people differently. So as much as I hate to say a pandemic offered us a silver lining, because I think that would be kind of feels kind of not right, but there is, I think if we look close enough, there is gifts in this.
And I think you're right, because it's that shared experience as well. We all went through it, so we can all relate to it, versus pre-pandemic. Not everybody was, able to relate to every single personal experience that people were going through. We now have that commonality. And it's funny you mentioned that, I can't count how many, dogs or cats that you've seen now on people's laps during work meetings. But it's definitely changed the work meeting and the work environment a little bit.
But can you imagine now, though, because we all were in the same boat, right? So we were all in the office, and then we're all on Zoom or whatever platform. And now we're coming into this hybrid. So there's the big challenge now. And so back to my earlier comment, really thinking about the technology you're using, How are you leading in this space? And how are you ensuring, because I think the bigger risk now is going to be, how are you ensuring that people feel included?
Yeah.
And
Big time.
inclusion, sorry, is something that I know we've talked a lot about, but I think the rubber is really going to hit the road, and we really need to figure out what truly that means in this new way of working.
I couldn't agree more. And I loved your point, because I was one of those people that fought very hard to keep my personal life and my professional life very independent and separated. And then we were forced to cross, and now we're kind of seeing where people are taking a step back and evaluating where they are in their career. Is it something they can do for the next 20 years, or is it an opportunity to adjust and themselves make that change? And we hear the conversation about finding your purpose or your whatever your passions are. And I think it awarded us the opportunity to just take a time out and take a break and take a breath, instead of being in the thrills of the daily life.
Mhm.
One of the things that you were talking about, or about to get into, is a lot of questions on HR professionals' minds, is because they're being tapped on by their CEO, is how do we attract talent? How come we can't find it? And how do we grow and develop the talent that we do have to meet the needs that we need, not only today, but also for tomorrow? What types of things are you evaluating from an engagement perspective? Are you changing your onboarding policies and procedures to more align with this digital age, to get people quickly up to speed and feeling a part of that company mission? What types of changes are you making to improve the overall engagement of employees that we know has stayed consistent at 30% for the last 15 years?
Mhm. So just ironically, just before COVID, because we do have a dispersed workforce, we had upped our game when it came to onboarding. So it was really good timing. And
Awesome.
I guess the proof was, prior to people joining Article, we spent a lot of time kind of educating them on our culture, who we are. We share the Article way, even though they're not part of the company yet. And we afterwards, one of the things I love to do is ask them afterwards, okay, so what we said before you joined us and where you are now, are we aligned? Is it aligned? Is it making sense? Do we sell you a bill, bad bill of goods? Is it real? And it's interesting because every single time I keep hearing, I haven't heard this yet where it hasn't happened, where they're saying it's even better than I thought. You really are living it. And so I think because we spent so much work focused on how do we ensure that they do have that set, they fit, belong, they have a sense of they can do well here, that we spend a lot of time on how do we set them up for success. So is it perfect? No, but we also ask a lot of questions. So we take the time to put those feedback loops in. What else could we be doing? We've been doing that since I joined, essentially. And so really wanting to make sure that we understand kind of what's working, what's not good, what could we have done differently, what could we have done better. We have a really open culture when it comes to feedback. And, one of our spirits, we have guiding principles, as I mentioned, but one of our spirits is relentlessly pursue remarkably better. And so that's in our DNA, if you will. And so the intentionality of really wanting to continuously improve has always been there. So with that constant feedback, we've been able to keep iterating and making it better and better.
I love that. And a lot of times what I've noticed in the HR professionals, and we hear the top down approach from DE&I, from culture, from everything, that it starts from the top down. A lot of times, because we had the luxury of limited competition, both geographically, but also just from an opportunity perspective, that people really weren't changing jobs. So it didn't award people the opportunity to progress their career in that hierarchical structure that we are accustomed to. And we're starting to see changes now, right? And HR is 79% of CEOs want to see their HR departments completely reinvented or and changed in entirety. But only 29% of CHROs believe that they need to reinvent themselves. So there seems to be a massive disconnect, right, between the CEO and HR. We talk about onboarding, we talk about kind of the DE&I initiatives. We know that we can sit there all day and talk about what this means. But in most cases, most HR professionals have learned to maybe be a little bit more silent because these ideas in the past were not awarded or celebrated as a good idea. How do you, Caroline, develop those key stakeholder relationships so when you do learn something from an employee survey that requires action, because you can predict maybe a challenge down the road, How do you develop those relationships so you can get these changes done that are required today?
Mhm. Well, we have a very close working relationship, all of us at senior leadership team. And so one of the philosophies I mean, I always believe if you're going to ask, you're going to do a survey and you're going to ask the question, then you better be prepared to share the results and tell them what you're going to do.
Thank you.
So that is anytime we've asked, we very transparent, we summarize it. We give them even feedback on the themes of the, like when it comes to comments, what are the themes, but we also share it with our senior leadership team. So there's that onboarding in that regard. So helping them understand this is what's being said. Here's our action plan, and this is what we're going to collectively do. And so it's a we game. It's not like this belongs in HR. Yeah, they're asking another survey and maybe not. We know what's going on. No, we're very transparent and we hold ourselves accountable too. So any survey that we've done, it's very clear what the action steps are. We don't overwhelm it, but what are the 3-4 things that we can do that we're committing to, and what's the timeline? And then we report back in all hands what we've done. So there's a high level of accountability. But one of the things that I remember interviewing with our CEO and founder, and we're talking about, like, I really wanted to understand his thinking around, and back then we call it HR, not people and culture. And I said, look, my position on this is we all wear this hat. I may champion the hat, but we're all wearing this hat and we're in it together. If we're truly going to build a remarkable company and we want a strong people and culture strategy, that is all of our collective responsibility. And so otherwise it's not going to work in my mind. It can't sit off to the side. It has to be fully entrenched. And so the onboarding too, the logic. So when I think about what I'm introducing, like right now, we're right in the middle of 2022 planning. So as an example, I really see the connection. What's the company objectives? What are we striving for? And then what's my team's connection to that? How are we truly supporting us in achieving that objective and ensuring a remarkable particle experience in the process? And so all those things need to be connected. So then when we're proposing something, it's very logical because it's in service of, not kind of some fad we're chasing because there's a new trend in our, in our industry or our profession that warrants, we got to pivot this way. We don't buy into the trends. We don't buy into really what other companies are doing because we are uniquely different. It's what is right for us. And I think that is what helps quite easily the work I get done. Like, I mean, it's not a hard sell.
Well, I love the accountability piece because I think sometimes if we don't have traditional numbers like the generally accepted accounting practices, there's nothing to hold us accountable. And then the conversation was, well, who owns turnover, right? And HR professionals say, hey, I don't own turnover. That is collectively a culture. And sometimes it's almost like a finger pointing game. So to hear how you work collectively with those key stakeholders and align with the business goals and strategy and see how you can connect and have an impact on each. I love that point. So thank you for that.
You brought up a great point about strategy. So let's go there for a minute or two, because one of the things that, I'm fascinated with is the pandemic kind of took everybody's 3-year plans and threw them out the wall, right? Threw them out the door or into the garbage. A lot of companies said, well, we had a 5-year plan to get us to be able to be fully remote. And oh, by the way, we had 3 weeks to execute on that plan once the pandemic hit. So give me your perspective, your insights on how has strategic planning, and we can look at it from an HR standpoint, workforce planning. How do you see that evolving? How do you see that changing now since we've all kind of experienced, the pandemic effect on just overall, strategic planning in general? Where do you see that going?
So I still think, well, there's still a need for it, right? So the environment change, it just means that you need to look at it more frequently, right? So you can have, we do our planning, we have a 2030 plan. So what we want to navigate, which we don't make public, but there is an internal navigational point. And so then we look at, okay, so what this year, what's in service? And again, it's very much of a collective exercise. It's not done in silos where individual heads of, will be working on it. It's very much in service of, and so there's a people component to it as well. Yeah. So if we're planning out what are we call them mission briefs, what are the innovative practices or things that we're going after in service of our strategic objectives, there is a people component to that. So consideration needs to be given is to the type, quality, what we're looking for, and then where are the gaps. And so what you call workforce planning, that's layered in. And it's not excluded. And so what we've seen in the past, where in our early days, as we're coming together as a senior team, it wasn't as fine-tuned. And realized like we're in hyper growth. So, I thought last year we were going to hire, what was it originally on the books? 600 people. Well,
Oh my gosh.
It's going to be close to 1,400. So it's like, so we are in hyper. So there's that constant attention that has to be part of the conversation, and it has to be connected. And that's where my team comes into play, because they're our internal customers. So, and one of our guiding principles is customer obsession. Well, that works internally as well. So how are we ensuring that we're going to support the different areas in delivering on what they're committing to in service of the company's overall objectives?
I love that. And I love the strategic conversation, like Chris said, is because what I am finding is HR professionals want to become more strategic, but the time, right, is really their limiting factor. So when we focus on the time and we do a 2-week look back period as where their time was spent, a majority of their time is still spent in the administrative tactical function, right? How, if we have been in this catacomb, let's say, of really an administrative firefighting, redheaded ugly stepchild, and now we're all of a sudden have to start to flip our mindset to become more strategic. What are some of the things that HR professionals can start doing today to become more strategic in mindset? Because I also think it's a shift in mindset that HR professionals now, it's their time to be those leaders that we're talking about within the organization, but that takes courage to step up and say, when you're not living out the mission, vision, and value statements within meetings, and protecting the culture that you've fought so hard to create.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot in that. So Kevin, if I heard your question correctly, I think if you're truly a partner in the business, not an administrative or firefighter, and so I'm not, that's not relatable to me. I'm not connecting the dots on that part, but in my mind is, you really have to understand the business that you're in, and you really need to understand what are the problems the business is trying to solve. And there's always going to be a people component to that. People, process, technology, there's some connection there. So understand the business, understand the problems that exist for the leaders in the business or the business in general, and then give time to think about how was your function or your team able to help them solve for that problem. So really connecting the dots and not thinking, well, my job's over here and that's their problem. No, it's our problem. We're one company, one team. You need to be thinking of it as a collective problem to be solved. And so understanding it is key, and then being part of the solutioning and what's the right thing to do.
That's good. I'd love to ask you, Caroline, about performance, because it's one of those things that I'm really fascinated from, company to company to company, the traditional performance management process. Now that we're in a hybrid environment, you can't just walk across the hallway, so to speak, and check in. Give us a little bit of an understanding about, how Article handles performance management. Is it more of a traditional set your goals at the beginning of the year, or has that transitioned a little bit more to a results outcome versus
kind of both, I guess. So we look at, so one thing we recognized very quickly is the old way of manually doing it wasn't going to cut it anymore. And you have no record. What does it really mean? It's just archaic. So we did introduce tooling last year that helps connect the dots to all things. So there's the performance review, if you will, but then there's also pulls in from our HRS system, engagement survey data, and you can kind of slice the data pretty cool to understand kind of the overall sentiment and where the high performers are and where their opportunities are. So it is all through tooling online, so there's no paperwork or anything like that. It's easy to connect and have conversations globally around the world. We break our performance reviews down in 6-month chunks. So, focused on understanding what are the company objectives, and then what's my role. So what am I focusing on in the next 6 months? But equal weighting to our values again. So 50% on, what is it they're going to do performance wise, and what support they need, because that's an important component too. And then, we break down our guiding principles, and there's goals set against that too. So there's a valuation of kind of where they're at, because we have want everyone performing in that way. And so there's goals that are being set against it too. So 50-50 weighting. And there's also feedback feedback points where any time throughout the year, if you and I say, Chris, are working together, I want to comment on just what a great job you did, I can be popping that in, because it does help the manager understand a more universal perspective of the individual. I mean, you and I may have a working relationship, but I see you a certain way, but you've been working on fantastic projects. Sure. Great to solicit that feedback. And we also have 360 mechanisms as well. Right. So we're trying to give them more holistic view. One of our values as well, our guiding principles, is win together. And win together is, the spirit of that is, being open and honest with our feedback in service of really supporting each other. That's and good. So wanting to not just wait for that review, but to, look at opportunities to provide feedback throughout the year.
Caroline, it sounds like Article is very good at making it a purpose-driven culture, right? It sounds like you're very almost like these. I go back to those old photos on the wall where it was like teamwork and everybody was rowing the boat, But I think that's what I'm hearing from you, is that you guys are constantly communicating to the employee population why they work for Article, right? Or what it means to work for Article, and I think that's probably why they are so passionate, and why you've seen such rapid growth, is that they're almost getting behind that and applying and doing everything within their power to ensure that the company succeeds as your win as one mentality. Mm-hmm. We start to talk about the individualized nature of HR today, right? Focusing on those key life critical events in an employee's life, whether it's marriage, whether it's the birth of a new child. And now we're starting to talk about the individualized nature from a talent acquisition standpoint. The other thing that we're starting to hearing is how learning and development has changed. And I know that you've had a lot of experience on the learning and development side from your time at Best Buy and others. How have you seen that change? Because we all work and live and learn differently. So what are you doing differently at Article today that maybe you weren't 5 years ago to meet people where they are today, to properly reskill and upskill them to the new needs of Article?
Mm-hmm. So we're still pretty junior. I've been with the company 2.5 years. We're just now building out our leadership development program. But one thing I really like what I heard you say, Kevin, I think that's the core, is it isn't one size fits all. Mm-hmm. And so as we're developing this new leadership development program, it is starting with a self-assessment. So the individual understanding where they are against what we hold valuable, is the leadership capabilities and the Article Way capabilities and the role capabilities. So having a true understanding of where I am at personally, and then what do I need for my individual development plan? I think what's key here is putting the individual at the center of and owning that development plan. Where if you were to ask me earlier in my career, I was putting together corporate universities, and it was a one size fits all, and everyone's coming in and they're all learning the same thing. And, and they're now you're good. Be the amazing leader now, because you went through, it was.
And you checked all the boxes.
Yeah. And hey, I'm not going to knock it. It was good training, but still it was still a one size fits all. And what I know to be true now is that it is not that way. So there is an opportunity to understand, when you do the self-assessments, what are the themes emerging among the group? Say you have a senior leadership team or a director level team or a management team. What are the themes emerging, and how can we introduce action learning in a way that helps them learn together now as well? So there's the individual, but then there's also the team-based learning opportunity in service of a real life problem within our organization, or an opportunity to apply it immediately. And so that's, as we're designing this new, way of leadership development program, that's kind of the foundation of what we're concluding is going to be important and how we're building it out right now. So we're in the design phase right now, and I should say proposal phase, because the spirit of what I said earlier, the importance of onboarding, getting people aligned so that it's not a P&C or L&D initiative, but no, this is our commitment as a senior leadership team, that we're committed to this, we're signing off on it, and we ourselves are doing it too. So that's leading by example.
I love that.
That's excellent. So in the spirit of action learning, Caroline, we're going to ask you the question that we usually ask, most of our guests. And we'll call this kind of the final question of the conversation. So for everyone who's listening or watching this podcast, who are HR professionals, what's the most important thing they should be thinking about in terms of, their own skill set, their own learning and development, and how they can continue to provide value as it relates to the future of work? So where does HR have the greatest opportunity to provide value? And what should individual HR practitioners and professionals be thinking about, as they continue along their own learning journey?
Mm-hmm. Oh, there's lots in there. Okay, so brain's going all over, going, ooh, good question, good one. Okay, so as an individual, you need to ask yourself how well you know your business. How well do you know the company? How well do you know your business? And how well do you understand the level of service you or your team's providing? Is it adding value? Are you adding value? If you didn't show up tomorrow, would anyone notice? Mm-hmm. Right? I hate to be that, and I hate to be rude about that. That's not my intention here, but it is a bit of a wake-up call. Yeah. So are you adding value? How do you know? And if is there more that you could be doing in service of helping the organization? People and culture is such a critical piece to the puzzle of how successful a company is being. So if you don't know that, find out, dig in and try to understand that. When it comes to your own learning, there's, again, similar to how we use the leadership training example, there is no one size fits all, but the opportunity to really understand kind of where are your opportunities, and don't be shying away from it. Hey, business is moving so fast. You're not expected to learn everything. And I think that's a misconception that a lot of, whether you're starting out or you're a leader and you think you have to have all the answers, you don't, but you have to be curious. And so one of the things I try to set aside every week is to listen to podcasts, to read articles from different thought leaders, and not just in my industry, but lots of different industries, because the gold nuggets are everywhere. And you never know where you're going to read something that's going to inspire a thought, and it's going to take you down a path going, hey, why didn't I look at our business this way? Mm-hmm. So just being exposed to that, being curious, but understanding your business, I think, is really critical.
That was a phenomenal response to that loaded question from Chris, Caroline. And I loved your you have to be curious, right? And I say that HR professionals have to get very comfortable with asking the question, why, right? And if we know that there are these fundamental pillars or how we got here as a business, why did we decide to do that 20 years ago? And I think when we start to get curious and start asking questions, that most will uncover that we always did it that way because, and the answer that you're getting is, it's my instinct, or I learned it from this other previous employer that I worked with before. But it's really being in tune with your employee population, the socio-economic climate that we're in right now that is really out of our control as a business. But how do we get back to empathy? How do we get back to kindness as leaders, and understanding that, hey, we're all going through this evolution at the same time. We're all going to go through changes. We're going to get bumps and bruises, but let's head towards the challenges, is what I heard you say too, is like, let's not run away from our problems. Let's figure out how we can have an impact and how we can enable our business to be successful. So thank you so much, Caroline, for gracing us with your presence on the show today. It was a fascinating conversation to just talk with somebody that has been successful in HR, has learned from learning and development, and now you're the VP of People and Culture there at Article. So thank you so much for being a part of the HRevolution conversation with Chris and I today.
Thank you both. That was fun.
Awesome. That's what we like to hear.